That's why zoos exist, because we see that beautiful creature in a cage, imprisoned, controlled, just like you, just like the rest of us. And if you can't have freedom, nothing can. You may look at that elephant, a giant beautiful beast that can walk 50 miles in a day, stuck in a silly little pig pen. And you may look at that thing having to deal with so many idiots, just like you. You may look in its eyes and see yourself looking back. Misery. The eyes of pure misery. The elephant's eyes. Your eyes. You match. It's not just elephants, it's zebras and orangutans, bison, buffalo, eyes, dik-diks. All kinds of creatures we have no business putting in cages before the eyes of a jaded and ungrateful public. Why do we do this anyway? Really? What's the point? What happened? When did we get so angry? When did we get so bored? The zoo is largely an invention of the 18th and 19th centuries, but its roots go deep. There are records from Egypt and China dating back to the 4th and 5th millennium about the keeping and controlling of exotic animals. And that's what these things tend to be about. Control, control, control. And then of course we know the Romans and the Aztecs like to display and ceremoniously kill all kinds of animals for all kinds of stupid reasons. Around the 13th century, King Frederick II, Holy Roman Emperor, started to collect animals from around the empire as trophies, and this is where the need to own wild animals starts to become widespread among the European aristocracy. Also, during the Renaissance, the extremely wealthy, and the Medici are a great example of this, they start to collect human beings from all around the world and put them in their menageries. The Medici Vatican menagerie of the 16th century had people of all different races from around the known world. This is where it gets creepy. This is so they can show them off to their guests to say, look at us. Look how much power and dominion we have over these animals and savages. The menagerie, these collections of animals and people, has its roots in the European imperial hegemonic system. Hegemony is all about power. It's a very, very deep power. A hegemonic system is a system where you have a dominant group who creates social constructions by convincing those below them that they need to accept their station in life, but they do it by giving them dividends. Hegemony only works because you agree to allow it to work. It works because it pays back. It wouldn't work if people stopped playing the game. For instance, the bourgeois will accept their place below the aristocrats because they're above the proletariat, and the proletariat will accept their place because they believe that they're above minorities, and the animals are at the bottom of this, bearing the brunt of it. It's a very participatory system, except for the animals, of course. They have no choice in the matter whatsoever. They are the total endgame victims of this thing. The menageries were built as a way to show off these hegemonic systems. This is an age of unpardonable cruelty to animals and human beings, all in the name of silly, fleeting little interests, curiosities, the need to show off power and control. Look at what we can control. Look at what we can possess. During the Enlightenment, especially in France, the public started to see these menageries as extravagant, and this led to their decimation. Hey, you aristocrats with your fancy exploitative menageries! That's cruel! Don't you know that's for all of us to gawk at? The first zoos were in public botanical gardens that also housed the old menageries. The one in France held the royal menagerie from Versailles, and this model spread into Europe throughout the 18th century. This gave rise to the notion of the zoos as a mark of civilization and dominion in more of a nationalistic sense. Every European city wanted to have one of their own. At this time, zoological gardens become symbolic for science, as a place for academic work. Zoos were intent on creating the most diverse collections possible, with the approach fueled by scholars and the recognition of man's domination over nature. Yet from such lofty heights we fall, don't we? In the mid-19th century, zoo design is focused on the satisfaction of its visitors. This is where we see the end to the scientific goals of the zoos, and where we see them firmly sit as a place to entertain the unwashed masses. This is where we start to see zoos focused on creating a spectacle. The enclosures were small, and the animals had nowhere to hide. Of course, these jerks want the animals to dance for them. They are happy with nothing. This is where we start to see primates with clothes on, doing tricks, and smoking cigarettes. These people are just awful. Zoos at this time utilized circular and hexagonal cages to provide a 360-degree view of the animal inside, and this in turn gave the animal the feeling of being surrounded. Zoos' most prized specimens were placed at the center of the zoo, and their cages were designed with a priority for public entertainment, with no regard to their welfare whatsoever. Lots of sloping channels and concrete floors, which prevented normal animal activities such as digging, and made lots of animals go insane. I mean, you'd go insane too. Studies at this time confirmed noticeable negative changes to the physiological and psychological states of the animals in combination with high mortality rates, and the curators of the zoos did little to change any of this. When the Philadelphia Zoo opened in 1874, its sloth was poked to death with umbrellas and walking sticks within the first week. In the 1870s, we see a reemergence of human beings being put on display. Carl Hagenbeck, a Hamburg animal dealer, was one of the first to create a zoo without bars, using moats to separate animals. Moats to separate the animals on display, and the people on display as well. In 1874, Hagenbeck decided to exhibit Samoan and Sami people in zoos. In 1876, he began to display African people with African animals in the zoo. This exhibit was extremely popular and toured London, Paris, and Berlin, showing exactly how awful every single human being on the face of the planet was at this time. In 1880, he acquired Inuit people, who were exhibited in his Hamburg Tierpark, his zoo without bars. All of the people put on display were essentially kidnapped, with no means of returning home. They were given a pittance and could only merely hope to survive. They had no hope in sight. These exhibitions were wildly popular, and many, many others began kidnapping and exhibiting people from all over the world, often naked, as curiosities, in an attempt to display European dominance and power, to reinforce the old hegemonic system. This was the payoff, after all. All the animals and all the people below them. Oh, look how strange they are. they would say as they stare at other people, other human beings on display in a zoo, as if having human beings on display in a zoo is totally not strange and a completely normal thing to do. As late as 1906, a Congolese pygmy called Otabanga was on display at the Bronx Zoo. Otabanga was displayed in a cage with the chimpanzees, then with an orangutan and a parrot, and was labeled the missing link, suggesting Otabanga was closer to the apes than Europeans. Otabanga stayed on display for months despite protests from the clergy. He had been kidnapped from the Congo, and he never had the opportunity to return. He wound up becoming severely depressed and wound up shooting himself in the heart. For a very, very long time, zoos have been a source of entertainment for the most obnoxious of our population, children and adult children. It wasn't until the 1970s that zoos started to make conservation a priority, and this gave rise to the authority of the American Zoo Association. They finally ended the practice of getting animals to perform tricks for the public after so many trainers admitted to abusing the animals in order to get them to perform. Many modern zoos see their role now as breeding endangered animals for reintroduction back into the wild, though their lists tend to focus on the charismatic megafauna, the popular kids, the pandas, the big cats, things like that. You don't see many rodents on that list. This is when the zoos decide to get all Noah's Ark on us. In 1981, American zoologists created the first species survival plan. The goal was to breed animals in captivity and reintroduce them into the wild. Zoos move animals around in order to maintain a healthy world stock. Each endangered species has a stud book manager. Like your mom. Oh. The Arabian oryx, extinct in the wild, was successfully bred in captivity and reintroduced into an Oman reserve. That was one of the success stories. There have been plenty of failures. Captive animals are notoriously difficult to return to the wild. Only 16 of the 145 reintroduction attempts have succeeded. Nearly all of the 500 orangutans zoos released into the wild in Borneo and Sumatra have died. There are all kinds of zoos now. Non-profits, for-profits, safari parks, aquariums, awful places that'll make you cry like roadside zoos and petting zoos that serve as mere passing entertainment at the expense of a life in miserable captivity. The modern notion of what a zoo is only really a product of the 1970s, though it has its roots deep, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, way back that go into a system of exploitation as entertainment, rooted in the imperial European hegemonic system. Only time will tell if it's gonna work or not, but so far the numbers don't look so good. The modern zoo, in all it entails, is a messy, complicated subject. On one hand, it's a life in captivity and an enclosure meant for public display. On the other hand, many zoos have become the last hope for so many species. Too many. They have sinister beginnings, but then again, many of us do. America does. Civilization as a whole does. The zoo story is a story still unfolding, like so many stories with such dark roots. Dark roots we will continue to uproot here on Terrifying World.